A few years ago, I was reading a Reader's Digest magazine, and I ran across a quote that I thought was pretty neat. I don't remember the writer's name, and I don't probably remember the words exactly, but I remember the message. And it goes like this. He said that time is defined as that which keeps one damn thing after another from all happening at once. Well, I guess time has been standing still for me lately because I've had a lot of things going on all at once. I guess that's okay. It gives me an opportunity to practice even-mindedness and poise in the midst of turmoil and challenges, stuff going on. And my new favorite saying here lately is, "This too shall pass." About now, you're probably wondering what in the world I'm talking about, so I'm going to take the camera out into the warehouse and show you. This shot shows about a third of the square footage in our building, and of course what you're looking at is stacks of drums of honey. I think there's about 1,100 in the building right now. You can't see them all in this shot. There's some around the corners that you can't see. We go through a lot of honey in a season. It takes about 2,300 drums to get us through a typical season, or at least it has lately. And so obviously I'm buying honey from other people. I hesitated to make this video because it really shows something that I've done very wrong. And after thinking about it, I thought, well, you know, if I'm going to try to help people get educated, I might as well show the bad stuff with the good stuff. So this here is some pretty bad stuff. That's quite a mess going on down there. And it's just as much my fault as it is the producer's fault who sent me some thin honey. We'll take the camera down there and take a closer look and talk about what's going on and what went wrong. As near as I can tell, there's about 45 drums in this in these two rows that are fermenting like crazy. Let's get a little closer here. If this will focus well, this drum is tight as a rock. It's under pressure. You can see there's honey oozing out from underneath the seal, and it's just dripping on the floor. And all of these drums back through here are doing the same thing. It's just a big, huge mess. Now, what's gone wrong here? Let's talk about that. First of all, when this honey came to me, just like every semi-load that we buy, we open some drums and do a moisture check and figure out what we're dealing with. This here came about a month ago, and I knew that the moisture was high. I chose to ignore it for a short time because we're trying to get a honey dryer going. I'll show you that in a minute. And it's a Daedant honey dryer, and they're advertised to take fermentation along with moisture out of honey. And I've got two friends that own one, and they say it works. It definitely does that, and it works really well. And we've been fighting, trying to get this thing working, and all the time we've been working on it, this honey's just been getting worse and worse, and I really didn't know how bad it was. I thought we had a little bit of time before it was going to start blowing the lids off like this. And my mistake, big mistake. I've made this mistake before and thought I never would do it again, and here I am eating crow again. This is a terrible thing. So the producer, I talked to the producer, and he said he was sure that the honey was thick enough, and he thought that maybe some moisture got in the drums from either wash down in the warehouse where they were stored last winter, or perhaps weather and transportation. And that was his thoughts. He's a good, honest man. I don't question his integrity. I believe he believes what he's saying. But there's kind of proof right here that no water got into that drum, or the seal wouldn't be that tight. It can't get that hard without a good seal. And so there's just no way that water entered into that drum. It had to be there in the first place. So this honey absolutely got packed in that drum too thin. It was honey that was produced last September, a northern state up by Canada, and it was late in the year and it was cool, and then it got stored for the winter in a warehouse up north. That's why nobody noticed any fermentation, because it was cold. If you store honey under 52 degrees, it doesn't ferment. The yeast quits working below 52 degrees. And that's one of the ways to combat fermentation in real thin honey. You can either store it cold underneath 52 degrees, or you can heat it up and kill the yeast in it. The yeast in honey is kind of unique. It's not necessarily inherent in the incoming nectar. The bees actually accidentally collect it while they're foraging, and they bring it on their body freely. It just comes in with the bees. And the yeast that survives in honey is not like the yeast in beer and bread and things like that. It's very tolerant of the high sugar content in honey. If you hold your temperature at 120 overnight, you'll kill the yeast. Or if you heat it up to 145 degrees, that we're talking about Fahrenheit here, you actually will kill the yeast entirely in just about 30 minutes. And I could have done that, but I just didn't want to, because I don't like heating honey. It really kind of makes honey deteriorate rapidly when you heat it to those kind of temperatures. Of course, now I wish I would have done something. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull one of the beekeepers off the beekeeping crew and get him to help me all day, and we're going to clean this mess up. I'm going to pull all of these drums out of here, and we'll very carefully let the pressure off on the lids and try to dig some of the honey out of there. I know what it's going to look like. It's going to be a foamy mess. I've seen this before. And we'll dig enough out to where we can put a good lid back on there and put a good band on it again. And I'm going to rent some space at a local cooler, and I'm going to take all this honey to the cooler and get it cold until we can get this honey dryer working properly. A lot of people think that if you get your moisture down to 18.6, that you've automatically curtailed any problems with fermenting, but that's not always the case. Now, this particular honey that from up north, I know is not a honey that ferments easily. Some honeys, like, cabbage palm comes to mind. Cabbage palm from Florida has a very high yeast spore count in it, and it ferments at a lower moisture content than many honeys. The yeast spore content in honey is generally measured by how many spores per gram you find in the honey. Some honeys might only have 1 spore per gram, whereas others might have 1,000 spores per gram. This cabbage palm I'm talking about came to me at 17.5% moisture, and it was fermenting at 17.5, so that tells me it had a very high yeast spore content. And then I've had some mangrove honey that was stored for almost 6 months at 19% moisture and showed absolutely no signs of fermentation. So it's not just the moisture content. There's an equation between the moisture and the yeast spore content that you have to look at when you're talking about fermentation like that. Anyway, just thought I'd show you the mess, and it's kind of embarrassing. Hate to admit it. I really screwed up here, but I had kind of a excuse, kind of a lame excuse, but it is an excuse, and I'll show you that next. This little gizmo here is a date ant honey dryer. It looks like it came out of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. It's pretty bizarre looking, but I've got a couple friends that have these things, and they say they work, and they work good. Just talked to one of my friends yesterday, trying to figure out what we're doing wrong or what's going wrong. And I can't figure it out. We're absolutely not pulling fermentation out of honey, which this thing is advertised to do, and both my friends say it does do. Honey cycles through it under a vacuum. This pump right here pushes water through a venturi, which is right there, and it creates a vacuum in this pipe right here that goes up to the top of the tank. And you can see a vacuum gauge right there. And yesterday that vacuum gauge was reading exactly what it's supposed to, which is 28 pounds pressure, or 28 pounds of vacuum. And this thing is supposed to pull a lot of moisture out under a vacuum. Most of us know that water boils at a much lower temperature at higher elevation, and that concept is used in this, where they put a big vacuum, put the honey under a big vacuum, and it removes moisture or steam under a very low temperature. I liked that idea. I thought I could run honey through here at a low temperature and pull moisture out, and it's supposed to do that, but we just can't get it to work, and we've been fighting with it for 2 weeks while that honey over there in the warehouse was fermenting away unbeknownst to me, and I'm kind of aggravated. I'm really unhappy with this machine, as you might imagine. This is an expensive piece of equipment. If you look in a data catalog, you can see the price. We have a tank of honey right here, thin honey that we put in, and we ran this machine for days. And not only did we not pull moisture out, but I believe we put moisture back in. Something's very wrong here. There's a pump under the tank that pumps honey over to this machine, this honey dryer, and there's another honey pump underneath that pumps honey coming out of it back into the upper part of the tank. The concept is sound. I know these machines can work. I've got 2 friends that got them and swear they're great, but we are just having a real problem with this thing. I will get to the bottom of it. I will get this figured out, and we will start pulling moisture out of honey with this thing. And in the meantime, tomorrow, I'm going to probably get John to help me, because he's pretty good at dealing with messy situations. And we're going to get all those drums of fermented honey out of there, clean them up, put them on pallets, get them to the cooler, and get them cooled down until we can figure out what in the world is wrong with this machine. Let's talk about what could have been done with this honey in the first place. The producer should have known that he was extracting thin honey. I'm always a little puzzled why more producers in humid areas don't try to use a drying room or something to try to pull moisture out of their honey before they extract it. I run across this problem a lot with people. There are certain producers I've learned just not to buy honey from anymore because they just don't seem to pay enough attention to moisture. This particular producer I know is a quality person, and the question comes up, would I buy from him again? And I probably will, and I'll tell you why. Because he's the type of guy, when he sees this video and figures out just how bad this problem was, he will bend over backwards to get it right next time. I'm kind of anxious to show him this footage so he can see what's going on. He will, I know he will try everything in his power to make sure this never happens again. So yeah, I'll buy honey from him again. But there's some people I've just learned not to. They don't care, they don't try to get it right, and as a packer I just got to do away with folks like that. We have a drying room. In fact, one of our procedures in the past for dealing with thin honey is to use our honey to mix with other people's honey to bring their moisture content to a level where we don't have a fermentation problem. I really like to see honey between 16 and 17%. I know that's hard to do for a lot of people in the east and the southeast, where we have such a humidity problem. In the southwest, humidity is not a problem. It might even be the opposite problem, because it's so arid that honey might be getting so dry in the comb that it gets hard to extract. I've experienced that before myself. We actually like to pull our honey in while it's still a little bit uncapped and put it in our drying room, which we run generally below 30% humidity, and we keep it real warm, about 90 degrees. When you do that and you put your supers in a good drying room, you can pull a lot of moisture out in just a few days. I'll try to add a clip of our drying room to this video so you can see what I'm talking about. A refractometer is a real handy device to have. I think every beekeeper that really cares should have a refractometer, learn how to use it, and use it. Moisture is not that hard to pull out of honey once you understand the chemistry behind it. Honey is hygroscopic, and if you If you handle it in a very humid environment, it will gain moisture. For instance, if you expose honey to a 60% humidity environment for a long time, it will equalize with that environment, I think, at about 18.3% moisture. If you have honey continuously exposed to an environment that's 50% moisture, or 50% humidity, excuse me, the honey will equalize with it at about 15.9% moisture. That's a good place to be. I don't think there's any honey that could possibly ferment at that level. In contrast, if you were to expose your honey continuously to 80% humidity, it would equalize with the environment at 33.1% moisture. That's extreme, obviously, and any honey will ferment at that level unless you've either killed the yeast in it or you've put it in a cool environment where the yeast can't be active. We choose to dry our honey when it comes out of the field, whether we think it's dry enough or not. If you extract, on cap, transport, harvest, and store honey in a humid environment, you are absolutely introducing moisture into your honey, and I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, especially here in southeast part of the United States. I know a lot of beekeepers in South Georgia and North Florida that struggle with moisture, and I think a drying room is really the right approach. There are machines like the one I just showed you out there in the warehouse where you can pull moisture out right immediately after you're extracting, and that's legitimate. I know several people do that. I know in Canada and some of our northern states here in the United States, there's a lot of canola grown, and they have a pretty severe crystallization issue with that nectar. Sometimes if you let all your combs get completely capped, it's hard to extract because it's already beginning to crystallize. And I know of a couple of beekeepers that actually pull and extract their honey while it's still pretty thin and barely capped at all, and then they immediately dry it with some sort of drying device. There's a lot of drying devices out there. You can Google it, Man Lake, Date Ant. I think several people around the world actually make devices that pull moisture out of honey. We try to go the drying room route and get the moisture out before we extract it. That just seems to work for us. And there's a lot of videos out there on how to create a drying situation. You don't have to have a large room like I do, or some of these fellas that you'll see in Canada and other states where they have a big room and pull in a lot of supers. All it takes is a cheap dehumidifier in a closet or a small room. You could even take some plastic and partition off a space in your garage or something and kind of keep it isolated from the environment outside, and put a dehumidifier in there and put a fan over your supers. I've seen videos where fellas put box fans right on top of their stacks of supers in a dry environment, and they remove a lot of moisture real fast. It doesn't absolutely have to be uncapped. Contrary to popular belief, moisture will move through wax cappings. It just happens very, very slowly. So if you're going to choose to have your honey completely capped and then try to dry it, it's going to take a long time. If you have a hive beetle problem or a wax moth problem, that's not a good choice if you have comb that has had broodroot in it or has pollen plugs or something like that in it. Both the hive beetle and the wax moth will get in there in short order. You usually got about 3 or 4 days before problems start to show up. But if you have virgin comb that's never been laid in, it can be there indefinitely without issues. I actually did something, I kind of made a mistake years ago. I pulled in a crop of cotton honey, which has a reputation for being very thin. That's a problem in South Georgia with a lot of these cotton honey producers. And it was all in virgin comb, and I had my drying room going, and I put all my supers in there and just left it alone. I had some treating for mites, and some feeding to do, and I just went ahead and left that honey in there for a couple of weeks knowing that it wouldn't be a problem. Well, when I came back, it was so dry I couldn't hardly get it out of the combs. It just didn't want to extract. I actually ended up taking a water hose and soaking the floor and soaking the tops of the supers and reintroducing humidity into the room to try to get the moisture content in the honey back up so I could extract it. So there is such a thing as going too far. But generally, if you can have your supers maybe 1/3 or 1/4 uncapped, put it into a dry situation that's under 30% humidity with a temperature of 90 or so, put some good industrial fans in there and get the air moving real fast and moving quickly, you can pull a point or two out of your honey before you extract, and that's how we approach it. Anyway, this is a different kind of video for me. This is more like a vlog video than an educational video. I really showed a lot of what's going on in my personal life here. Kind of got a mess going on in that warehouse. I also have a few employees that are not here. The man that usually keeps track of the warehouse just got exposed to COVID-19 virus, and he did the right thing. He called us and said he wouldn't be able to come to work, and he's put himself on a 2-week quarantine, after which he'll be tested before he comes back to work. So normally he would be the man that would help me clean up this mess, but I'm just going to have to take time away from the bee yard and pull in one of my beekeepers with me and get that stuff cleaned up out there. Anyway, that's what's going on in my life today. Next video should be more warm and fuzzy. I'll be feeling better about all this. I'll have it behind me, and we'll move on to the next adventure. This is a shot of our drying room. Here in Georgia, we really have a humidity problem. I like to bring the supers into this room for a couple days before we extract, pull a little moisture out. We have these industrial fans in the ceiling just pointed straight down at the stacks. We try to keep this room really dry and a little bit warm, and that does the trick. We just had to get a new dehumidifier. One of our old ones kind of pooped out on us, so we picked up a nice expensive one. It's supposed to really do a number, and it should. It was $2,500, but I hope it'll really help us out. I just watched the video I took earlier today and realized that I did not address the question that's most likely going to come up. I get asked this question often, and the question is, why can't I just take the lid off of my bucket or barrel and blow warm, dry air over the surface with a fan? And the answer is that honey has a very poor diffusion rate, and you will have an effect on the surface, but that effect won't migrate very far, very fast down into the container. I actually tried this several years back. I had a barrel of honey that was too thin, and I warmed it up with a band heater to a little over 100 degrees, and I put a fan blowing pretty stiffly across the top of the drum and left it that way for a couple weeks. And what I found is that the surface was greatly affected, but when I went down just 1 or 2 inches, it seemed like there was almost no effect at all. For that to be effective, you have to continuously or often stir the honey, and that's actually how some of the commercial honey dryers that are available out there work. They have screws or paddles that continuously turn the honey over and change the surface area while warm, dry air is being blown across that surface. So just be mindful of the fact that that won't work unless you can spread the surface out. Like I've seen videos where fellas, smaller hobbyist beekeepers, would spread the honey out on cookie sheets or some thin kind of sheet to where it was only a 1/4 inch thick, and then blow hot, dry air across it, and that had a pretty good effect. But from a commercial beekeeper's point of view, that's not a very good option. So just thought I'd address that in the video rather than wait till I got the question in the comments section. Jamie, your t-shirt sums up everything around here. Would you turn around? I believe that says it all. Thank you.